Welcome to the Bali Business Podcast, and today I'm with Sayang Rop. She is the former CEO of the Biasa Group and current CEO of Paul Ropp, which is I would say, kind of a heritage brand as far as Balinese fashion brands go. Been around since the early 80s, late 80s?
The establishment itself with that brand, early 90s,
Early
1994 or
Okay.
6.
So we've been around for a long time. So yeah, join us. We're going to discuss everything fashion, do's and don'ts, how it operates in Bali, but it does apply to any fashion brand, I suppose, anywhere in the world. So from production or sampling all the way through to the final product, how it works, the business of fashion. So join us and Sayang, and we'll kick off in 2 minutes, yeah? All right, so here we are with Sayang Rop. Bit of an unusual name, Sayang.
Yes,
You were born and bred in Bali.
sure.
Spent your whole life here.
Mostly.
Mostly, yeah. Italian heritage, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What does Sayang actually mean? And I'm sure you get asked this question a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does sayang mean? It's an Indonesian term of endearment. So
Okay.
it's essentially like sweetheart, darling, love, or
Okay.
baby. People use it to call each other sayangku, my darling.
Okay. And Rop is your father, who started the fashion brand Paul Ropp,
Mm-hmm.
and your mother started the fashion brand Biasa.
Correct.
So you were brought up into a fashion household, which goes back generations, I hear. I think it was your grandmother or grandfather?
Great grandma.
Okay. So how did your family end up in Bali? Like, what was the story behind that?
If I remember correctly, my dad came here for some sort of sunglasses shoot for Calvin Klein or something way back when.
He was shooting it or model or?
No, I think he was coordinating a campaign for Calvin Klein.
That's a long time ago.
It was a very long time ago.
Yeah.
It was, I would say, early 80s, late 70s. Actually, he's been here since 79. So.
Oh, that's the year I was born, actually.
And.
Bali must have been wild back then.
Oh, yeah, just rice fields.
Yeah.
Barely any roads, to be honest.
So he was living in the States, working for Calvin Klein?
No, he hasn't lived in the States since long before that. I think before he moved here, he was actually living in Goa. He's part of the Goa movement.
The triangle, the Goa, Bali. What was the other venue everybody used to go to back in the 80s? Ibiza or something, yeah.
Yeah, so he's part of that. So he's been not living full-time in the States since maybe even the 70s at some point. Moved to Goa, started the Tibetan T-shirt company, which was quite a pioneer in tie-dye and screen printing for T-shirts.
Okay. So he's always been in fashion?
Well, he won't call it fashion. He calls it oohs and ahs. It's art. He always said he's not in the business of fashion. He's in the business of oohs and ahs. He likes to make a statement. But I mean, he comes from like Studio 54, going way back New York days when it was all about artistic expression and exploration and
cultural liberation.
Yeah, pop culture, working alongside all of those characters. That's really inspired his.
So he was a New Yorker.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then he went to Goa, doing his thing there, T-shirt prints, etc. Came to Bali for a production, Calvin Klein production, and then decided to never leave. Yeah.
But yeah, basically fell in love, new home, established himself here with like that are one of the original expat communities. I think at that time he was here, he was doing fashion, but not with his own private label. So he used to, I think, facilitate production for other labels.
Production as in production in Bali, like cut and sew?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they would basically produce for like big fashion houses, like Zara and Miss Selfridges and what's the other one in New York that I can't remember right now?
Saks or Neiman Marcus? Or,
like a lot of them.
Okay. So
and
he was
then,
doing big production runs.
yeah.
Okay. But in the 90s in Bali, that must have been, I mean, wouldn't say Bali is well known as in far as cut and sew production. Like
It wouldn't. I don't think it would be wholly in Bali. I think that we did a lot of, let's say, work through India as well. So India has always been a very big part of the beginning heritage of both my parents.
okay.
And there was a lot of collaborative work between here
So they
and
were
India.
moving to India, Bali, doing the production in both.
In both, I would
Okay.
assume. They had a big one here too, though. So when the buyers from all those big, fashion
Retailers,
houses,
yeah.
retailers, they would come here and place the orders. And I think when my mom started working with my dad before Biasa, she would design collections for them to order, then they would produce and ship full wholesale. And that was before either of them started their fashion, like, private label.
Oh, so they were doing made to order, like white label, so they would design a collection for the retailer, do the
Yeah.
production in India here, and then
Yeah.
deliver. Okay.
Yeah, massive production, like massive orders back in the day.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
and
those
that
big
was
American retailers were huge. I mean, there
Yeah.
was like 5 of them doing huge quantities. So,
Yeah.
okay. And then, is that how your mother and father met? And then
No, that they started doing that together because they had already met. So my mom came in 82, 83. It's a funny
why
story.
did she move here?
Her best friend, no, okay, she moved here because she had a best friend who I believe was an Indonesian guy, I don't remember. She came here to visit him, crash landed here actually on her first time to Bali. The plane had an emergency landing.
Oh, like literal
Literally.
crash landing.
And she came to stay with her friend and also fell in love and never left.
But
And
came
then-
from
Came
Italy.
from Italy, but at that time she had already been spending time as a photographer in Aspen. So she was already like on her venture out of being in Italy since she was quite young. She came here at 27 and she's been here ever since.
Okay. So your mom traditionally fashion background or photographic background or art background? Because I know
Well-
Biasa is very influenced by art.
Yeah.
So is your mom, I mean, she just, I presume, loves all 3 of those things, but
I think mom just loves all things art and culture. And beauty, although it's objective, still there's some sort of pull towards that. But she, I think, as a hobby, and she was quite good at photography, being able to see the beauty, the composition, the context
The
of
detail,
photography is one way of exploring aesthetic. And she was working as a ski photographer in Aspen.
wow.
But she used to work for her mom as a designer for her mom's establishment. So she's 3rd generation fashion already on the woman's side of my mom's side.
What kind of fashion? Were like more on the couture side or?
Kind of. So my
cut and
grandma,
sew?
she had a label called Mariela Ami. And actually recently I found a bunch of her stuff on eBay.
Oh, wow.
And I bought it for my mom. And they're like
Oh, wow.
epic things. She did a lot of, like, back in the day, fur, massive big jackets, all these kinds of coats and dresses and beautiful cultural heritage, like, craft. She was already using it back then. So
And this was in
Italy, in Rome.
In Rome. Oh, okay.
I think she was one of the first, I don't remember the details, I should better, but she was one of the first women to open a ready-to-wear, not a ready-to-wear, but to open a boutique and own a boutique
in Rome.
in Italy.
Oh, in Italy. Oh, wow. Okay.
I might get the facts not entirely correct.
Let's not fact check this.
Let's not fact check that. There's my mother could tell that story obviously a lot better than me. But she did a lot of export and shows.
Okay.
And she would, under her own name, but would sell everywhere else.
So long historical heritage fashion background.
Yeah.
Parents meet here, then meet, and you come along.
Yes.
And then, so you've been brought up in a whole, in Bali from day one, and then the whole fashion kind of business, the business of fashion.
Yeah.
On both sides,
Yeah.
mom and dad, yeah. So we'll discuss kind of the changes Bali's gone through as far as fashion, because it's quite an interesting little little pool of quite I wouldn't say a fashion center, but it's definitely got its
A pool.
A pool, yeah. And then, but Bali must have changed.
Oh God,
Yeah.
drastically.
Yeah. So you started out in Seminyak, Kuta area, I would
Seminyak.
presume. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So tell me a bit about how Bali has transformed over the
Okay.
20 years that you've been alive.
20?
22, maybe.
Not so much. Okay, so okay, to give you a little bit of perspective, growing up, I mean, up until 6 years ago, I lived in the same family home, and that was always since my dad and mom. My dad's had that house before my parents even met.
So you've been living in the same house, yeah?
Yeah, so I've been living in the same house, or I was up until 6 years ago, living in the same house that my dad had since before my parents met. And in my childhood, in my memory, I have seen it go from, you could see the ocean, like all rice fields around us, nothing. We were like one of 2 or 3 houses in like the entire area, with no buildings, barely a road. And you could see all the way to the ocean. This was Dianapura, which is now like the gay street, right?
Okay.
Dianapura,
Seminyak,
Seminyak, yeah. So Dianapura, all around us was rice fields. And
Oh, wow.
and then it was what, 15 years ago that development really started. And I remember there was this one time where there was like 6 like 800-room hotels being built at the same time in like less than a kilometer like radius.
800 room.
Massive hotels
Oh, that is
being
massive.
built all around that area, and then
Oh, wow.
the bars and the restaurants and the shops. And now for already probably 10 years, more than
Seminyak
10 years.
exploded. I mean, late 90s, maybe? 95?
No, I would say it exploded in the early mid 2000s. It started exploding. No, even further than that. Later in the 2000s, the progress has happened so fast. Like it's the exponential growth. I don't know how it boomed.
Yeah, I've seen it happen in Pereiranim, because I've been here 6 years, and that's exploded. So Seminyak is a massive scale, a lot bigger.
Massive.
The scale must have been huge back in those days. But
it's kind of the same. This used to be nothing, and it became something so populated. It was the same thing in Seminyak. I mean, the infrastructure and like the building of the hubs has started Kuta, Seminyak. You know, then it goes out to Canggu, Prerana, now it's going out to Sese, Nyani. It's just going to continually grow and just populate every coastal area without a single patch of rice field left. Like my house has not one single patch in for like a few kilometers.
Yeah, we discussed this actually on an earlier podcast, green zoning and how ineffective planning. Yeah, we won't get into that. But so your journey specifically is discuss fashion. So your journey, I mean, I presume having parents like you do, were you pushed into the fashion world? Did you resist it? How did it all happen?
No, my parents never pushed me into the fashion world. I guess I found myself in it. I never expected to be in the fashion world. I mean, growing up around it with my parents, Bali was such a small world back then. So it's kind of very well known. You know, they were very well known. They're big household names, especially when I was growing up. So it was always around, and you get summer jobs. You know, you're helping around. Your conversations at home have a lot to do with the business. So you kind of like learn by default, and you experience it by default and absorb it. Having parents like them and what they do, and they're so engrossed and passionate about what they do. But I moved away for not just university, I guess. I did schooling abroad. I did 12 years of schooling abroad, and I never thought I'd move back to Bali.
So what did bring you back?
A desire to help the family business, and it was a very shocking revelation. It was
moving
unexpected.
Back to Bali or helping on the business?
Being interested in helping the business, and moving back to Bali was never something I thought I'd do. I thought I'd come here for a year, help my dad. I came originally to help in my dad's business at Paul Ropp, and life happened, and here I am 8 years later.
Wow. Okay. So what were you first helping
in Paul Ropp.
Yeah. Was that your first formal role with either of the brand, or were you working like weekends
No,
as a kid?
since I don't know how legal it is, but since I've been 13, I've been like working summers.
Okay.
I've been working always in there, whether it's like an internship, experiential learning. I mean, I've done things like my whole job was to just go through years of media archives to systemize the foldering system so that people could track images. I mean, anything from that to I used to actually write their articles for Paul Ropp throughout the years and, lead photo shoots. It's kind of been a little bit of here and there. And my dad's favorite thing was to have us sitting in on his meetings and see how he operates. It's one of his biggest, it's his legacy, it's his biggest love, aside from family, that he loved to share with us. So every opportunity that we could get, he would love to have us in there and just experience it with him.
Okay, so that was your first role with your dad. So you were working on Paul Ropp. So the business was fairly established when you came in?
Yes. Yeah. By the time I came in, the business has been established. I've totally lost track of time.
But a couple of decades.
Yeah, 20 plus years. And it was very established, very successful. It had its name, it had its everything. But at that point, my dad was already aging, and he also didn't have any more like, at the height, I think, of his business practice, he had PR, assistants, kind of a lot of support system around him for the business side of things and the operativity. And he had just come off like dengue or other sicknesses that kind of slowed him down. Mm-hmm. And he didn't have all of that auxiliary support. So he asked me to join him in Miami because he was presenting a collection to potential buyers. And I'm sitting there in these
presenting
meetings.
a Paul Ropp
collection because he didn't have his salespeople, his PR people, so he was doing it on his own. And he asked me to support him in that endeavor. So I'm here in these meetings in Miami with him about the collection, about the sales, talking about all of these things that I realized that I was capable of helping. I could actually make a difference and support him in a way that he needed at that time. So I kind of made a very unexpected, fast decision to move back. Okay. I said I would do it for 6 months, a year, help him out.
Here you are.
Here I am 8 years later. Okay. And then I moved from my dad's. After a year, I moved to my mom's and actually spent most of my tenure there.
So you're with Paul Ropp, and you were there for 8 years. Well, you were at Paul Ropp for a couple of months.
1 year.
What was your official role in that business?
I was there for a year. My role was kind of operations manager, general manager. I mean, it's hard to define. Mm-hmm. But what I did was mainly I took control of their marketing. Mm-hmm. I created their new e-com platforms, Instagram strategies, shooting strategy, media strategy, communications.
And then so more on the marketing, PR,
yes,
Marcom's side. And then you left Paul Ropp and then you went to Biasa, yeah?
Yes.
Okay. Explain that whole move and what was the change, and then what you did at Biasa.
So at Biasa, I actually started off as, let's call it a merchandising intern. I really started off low. Mm-hmm. And I spent the first year really just trying to absorb, because the business practice and the operativity of these two companies, even though they're same industry and have a lot of similarities, it's like two different machines. So in
what way are they different?
Operative practices and methodologies. It's
tricky. That's okay. We'll get back to that. Okay.
So I started off as a merchandising intern, and then I moved in as retail manager. And then COVID kind of hit around that time, where I was transitioning from retail manager I was retail manager, then retail and marketing manager. Then COVID hit. Mm-hmm. And then I became retail manager, marketing manager, merchandising manager, kind of took over finance as well, and legal. And that's kind of how I developed into CEO at that time, mm-hmm. because well, with Biasa during COVID, both of these companies, being so long-standing, have tenure of like your employees. They've been there 20 plus years, 30 years, some of them.
So how many employees more or less are in, well, let's talk pre-COVID, and then let's go into COVID, because I'm sure there was a lot of very stressful change management that you had to deal with during that time. So how many employees then, how many employees now, more or less? And how many stores altogether?
Okay, one at a time. So employees, when COVID hit, I'm pretty sure we had about upwards of 250 employees.
Mm-hmm. It's a big operation.
Yes,
yeah.
It's a big operation. 9 stores.
This is Biasa.
Biasa,
yeah?
250 employees, 9 stores. Paul Ropp, 4 stores, several hotels. But we also have Thailand as a company for Paul Ropp, which has its own stores. Pre-COVID, it had 4 as well, plus like 10 hotels.
And the hotels were everywhere. So it was a concessionary, I presume, concession or consignment internationally, yeah?
No, these companies, we used to, like years ago, there was a lot more international exposure for Paul Ropp. Mm-hmm. But now they've been more contained to Bali and Thailand, where the hubs of the businesses are, where the 2 businesses are, mm-hmm. for better control and operativity.
Okay, so you scale back on the consignment concession side, other businesses?
In terms of expansion geographically, yeah.
Okay. Okay, and are you back to pre-COVID levels as far as staffing and where you were?
Biasa is, and which is a real testament to the companies and the brands' survival skills. Strength. Yeah. It's definitely back to pre-COVID mm-hmm. numbers. And probably on even stronger. Okay. Not just sales side, internally. That's saying that during COVID, we did 100% PHK severance to people who have been there for 20 plus years. What is owed to them? It was like the ethical thing to do, because at the end of the day, with company regulations in Indonesia, it can become a sticky point. But we essentially operatively closed down the company for a few months during COVID, and then started again from 20 people and grew all the way back.
Yeah, that must have been exceptionally difficult, because, growing your talent for 20 years or 15 years and losing that and have to try and onboard that again must have been traumatic.
Yeah, it's one of those biggest learning curves of understanding the true value of your artisans, whether it's people who know your history, your growth, the growing pains that you've gone through and why. It is so tied to the people that have been with you through that. And the minute they're not there, whether they've moved on, so many people moved back to their villages during COVID and didn't necessarily come back so fast. And when you move those people with the skills, especially the sewers, that are your true heart and soul of being able to produce what you produce, it's a real wrench that gets thrown in if you don't have that, and you realize how valuable people's skills, knowledge, and experience with you is.
And also it's a bit of a dying skill, I would think.
Absolutely.
That kind of hand. Maybe just discuss that a little bit. Like Biasa specifically is very artisanal, handwork, hand stitching, beading, etc. So those kinds of skills, you need to develop somebody when they're young, and they just,
Yeah, being a seamstress, a sewer, a tailor, that is, for me, it's very linked in Bali specifically, but it can be seen on a global scale too. But in Bali specifically, it's very much linked to this commercial tourism growth and what kind of other opportunities exist now, because rather than being a seamstress, which is a lot of work and skill and labor in a way, because you really have to be good at what you do, people much rather be a waitress, work in a hotel, get their tips, work in a villa, be a lot more culturally exposed to the novelties that are being introduced in.
So you're struggling with, you developed talents over years, and you would struggle to onboard new people.
Yeah, because it's that skill is not, the younger generations don't have an interest in learning that anymore. And it's very much true also for other artisanal practices, whether it's certain kinds of hand woven techniques or block printing or dyeing techniques. If it's like yarn dyed, or the methods of dyeing through like, there's these methods in India that you use like cow dung and stuff to dye, like these kinds of heritage practices that were so necessary, and they were nurtured so much in the past, are becoming a dying trade. And that's what one of the similarities between Biasa and Paul Ropp is, that they're really both in their techniques and their standards and what they're trying to achieve on an artistic level and an artisanal level is to kind of to protect it.
Yeah.
To keep it going, these dying trades that the younger generations have not as much of an interest in.
So how are you doing that? Like in reality, like do you have like a youth program that's trying to, or developing the families of employees? Like, because once it dies off, it's gone. It must be very difficult to bring those skills back.
It is, and things are also being a lot more automated now, right? Especially with
fast fashion, as opposed to slow fashion.
Exactly. When the factories come in, the big machines, they're taking away. The minute that you industrialize for operational efficiency a artistic form like fashion or craftsmanship, you lose the essence of the art behind it, and that the art at your fingertips.
And I suppose that's what really sets both your brands apart. Biasa is all about the artisanal, slow fashion side of things.
At the end of the day, yeah. So it might be fashion, it might be a business, but there's so much more depth to these two brands and what they can teach and expose and express in terms of cultural heritage and importance.
And then I suppose that if we could get back to identity, because both of those things are really important, branding, identity, and how that's linked to what you've just explained about how manufacturing process, sampling process, etc. So how do those two interplay? So you got your brand identity and then your actual garment production.
So that's like your stream, like your
how
the dotted line between your
it might not be something that you consciously know, but it's very visible from the outside. But those two things have interplay, and your brand is built off those, how your product's manufactured,
I think that I want to be careful how I word this a little bit, how I conceptualize it, but I mean, I think this answer might be slightly different in the details between these two brands. But at the end of the day, it's understanding brand identity above all else. That's first, and that's what dictates how you get from A to Z.
So what is brand identity then to you and your businesses? Like, how do you define that?
So, for example, for Paul Ropp, brand identity has always followed kind of like my dad's personal, like he has these adages, like fun in the sun, or it's always about expression. It's about color. It's about breaking convention, breaking boundaries, staying true to yourself, not because it's imposed externally, but because you're defining it internally. So it's never followed trend. It's never followed some sort of, externally set requirement of what fashion should look like, should be done like. It's very self-imposed and self-directed. And that goes, then you link that to the cottage industry in India and how Mahatma Gandhi said we can empower our people by putting a loom in every household, and therefore they become self-sustainable and they don't rely on the British rule for sustaining their own families. They can get themselves money, they can make themselves clothes. They have the power in their own hands to do what they need by putting a loom everywhere, in every household. And that leads into how the weavers are taught from the parents, every generation. It becomes a family practice and a family way of life. And I think Paul Ropp has very much honed in on that and based its identity on a very similar thing. It's about you having what you need, your expression, your independence, freedom of expression, freedom of art, creativity,
which is a reflection
emotion,
of your dad.
Which is a reflection of my dad. And the same is true, as I said, I think, for Biasa, and just a very different identity, but it's a reflection of my mom about, I mean, her motto is extraordinary simplicity. So what looks so simple at first sight, then you look into the details, you know, and the little signature messages here and there about how things are put together, the construction, the thought process behind the prints or the way it's constructed, or there's so much depth into that. And I do think I've strayed from your initial question.
No. I mean, it's fabulous, which I think leads on to my next question, which is your mom's Biasa and art work very closely together. And your mom is an artist. A Biasa is an artistic brand. It's an artistic expression of clothing. And you can see that on every piece, you know, they're all special pieces, you know. But how did art, because you have a exhibition space.
We have a gallery, yeah.
Gallery,
so there's Biasa art.
Okay, so how did that all come about, and how does it fit in?
Well, so when Biasa first started, it was one small store. It was 1994, and it was just fashion. But then there was Biasa Group, I'm pretty sure, emerged because Mom wanted to have her hobby, which was art. I think through her travels through Indonesia, again, I was really young. This happened in 2005. But through her travels in Indonesia and part of her exploration, research and development, cultural growth and understanding and outreach, she came across a lot of booming contemporary artists in the art scene of Indonesia that kind of gave her like a muse, like a spark. So she actually started the art as a complete passion project. And then that's why it was separate from the fashion side on a company level. And that's where Biasa Group was born, to house both concepts.
Was it local Indonesian
Indonesian, contemporary Indonesian art. Yeah.
Okay.
I think a lot of her original exposure to that may or may not have happened in Yogyakarta. Don't quote me on that. But
Okay.
And then she decided to create the art as a way to present and showcase Indonesian artists, because contemporary art for Indonesia was not a very big thing back then. They might have had a couple well-known galleries, but she started this one to really, it was a passion project. It wasn't, she just did it because she really enjoyed it, and she's very good at it. And then slowly, Biasa art and my mom became quite synonymous in the contemporary art scene and the gallerist scene. And she was actually awarded a few years ago the knighthood of the Republic, from the Republic of Italy, for her cross-cultural development between Indonesia and Italy.
Oh, wow.
Because she brought the first Indonesian artists to the Venice Biennale and presented them there as part of her gallery.
What is the Venice Biennale?
It's the biggest, one of the biggest it happens, in Venice. It's the biggest art scene.
Excuse my ignorance.
I don't even know how to explain it, but it's the biggest art, collaborative cultural art exhibition in Venice that happens biennial. How do you say that in English?
Biannually,
yeah. And it also happens Art Basel. So there's Art Basel.
Art Basel, yeah.
So it's like that, but the Venice Biennale is actually I think it used to be bigger. Again, art is not my scene, so I am not the best to speak about it, but she brought the first Indonesian artists to be presented in.
And she was knighthooded.
She was knighthooded by the Republic of Rome. Knighthooded by the president, but knighted by the ambassador of that time in Jakarta. We had a little shindig for her in the embassy.
Wow. Okay. So I think, philosophy, what you stand for, what the brands stand for, heritage, etc. Let's bring it back to the practicalities of the 21st century. How do you maintain this kind of integrity when you have to deal across verticals and platforms and things like TikTok, Instagram? How do you keep that integrity?
That's where your brand identity is extremely important.
So how do you control that nuts and bolts, day in, day out? How is your brand, how do you control this across a team which is a few hundred strong? And is it something that's always been there? Like as far as like your management SOPs, your brand Bibles, etc. Was it something that you just had to Because for you, it's probably intrinsic. You know these things because you've been there from day one.
Yeah.
But you've got to manage, like you're managing a company, sizable businesses now. How do you ensure that that integrity is maintained?
I think it's a very big challenge. And I think this is where the longevity of your employees play a massive role. It's the hardest with new employees. So when your employees and when your company has grown through those growing pains of, pre-social media to today, like the polarization of media has changed the game entirely. And the accessibility to internet and the different platforms and media trends has changed everything every step of the way. But when people have been there from day dot and gone through those pains with you as a growing company, as your brand is developing, because things are always moving forward. Brand is evolving. Even if you have your identity strong and your identity remains the same, the way that it is projected, communicated, and grows and develops will always continue to develop. Stagnancy is like death, right?
Death, yeah.
So having people who have that heritage with you, they help to ensure and foster the continuity of your brand ethos, your brand standards, and the direction, because it's the hardest thing now to bring in newer generations of people, especially with the difference in work ethic between older generations and Gen Z, whatever the case may be, to bring in that kind of freshness into a very established business lends itself to a lot of potential clash.
Issues, yeah.
Yeah. So to answer your question, how do we keep that?
It's culture.
It's culture.
Yeah, it's a business culture.
And it's the one
more so than the manualization of processes and
it's the one, the people making decisions, whether it's a hiring decision or a management decision, they need to be able to represent your brand and understand it. So even if, digital marketing strategy dictates that to increase your sales, you need to do X, Y, and Z. If that might work for a mass brand or fast fashion, it doesn't mean to adopt it on a company like ours, because we need to make sure that we are abiding by our own set of rules in terms of how to maintain and protect the integrity of our brand DNA.
And I suppose that buck stops with you these days, really.
No, absolutely not.
Who's it stopping with? Well, I suppose your mom is still involved heavily on the Biasa side, but
Absolutely. Oh, you mean for Paul Ropp?
Paul Ropp, yeah.
Yes, but also because I have, 3 of the 4 pillars of that company have been there 20 years. They know the history. They live, breathe, and are the brand and grew with the brand and have been there for all of the growing pains as much as anybody, even more than me.
So that's your merchandisers, marketing managers,
and production manager. Your company is as good as the people within it. And when they're standing up for your brand and protecting your brand as much as you are as a leader, that's where you're strong.
So let's take a step back. Let's talk about fashion, because fashion is actually, from my experience, which we won't get into, but it's a really tricky business. Seasonal, manufacturing product, sampling product, What would you say are the biggest challenges? So we're advising a startup or somebody who wants to get into the industry, and from where they are now to where you are now, what would you say are like the standout kind of lessons that you would flag for somebody getting into this industry?
I think that I might have a different answer if you're talking fast fashion or slow fashion. Because if you're talking fast fashion, it has a lot more to do with efficiency and productivity and industrializing your practices.
And price points.
It's really about playing the game. But if you're talking about slow fashion brand identity, that's an entire different game, like ballpark.
Well, I think it's a bit of a hybrid these days, is kind of where things are going a little bit. But let's talk about Bali, because I suppose we live and we operate. But so I suppose there is a bit of a fast fashion mix into things here, but it's not true fast fashion. We're not talking like Zara or Shein or something at that scale. So it's still small cut and sew operations, 10, 20, 30 sewers, single pattern cutter in the sample room, etc. That's the kind of operational size that we're looking at. We're kind of finding efficiencies on that scale isn't a big deal. So if you step outside of that, what other than efficiencies, what other advice would you say? Where will the uphill battles come in the next 5 years after they start this journey?
Well, I think if we see over my lifetime in Bali, a lot of the parents of the kids I grew up with, so those expats back in the day, a lot of them were in fashion. And you see a lot of people coming here now for fashion because, the perception is that raw materials and labor are cheap, and therefore you can explore your creativity on a commercial platform without too much headache. However, what people don't realize, especially now with the turnover and this machine churning of businesses up and out very fast.
What's starting and then closing, or
yeah, because
in fashion or just in general?
In general, but fashion and F&B are the highest turnovers of businesses.
I mean,
here.
F&B is wild turnover.
Wild,
Yeah.
but so is fashion. Fashion labels starting, stopping because why?
And why?
Why? There are several
Good
reasons
question.
in my question, in my perception. Okay, why? Because number one, the market here is extremely saturated
For fashion.
for fashion.
You could say that, but then you look at the tourist numbers, you look at the new airports, you're looking at new ports, cruise liners, all those kinds of things.
No.
The market's growing hugely.
Sure, but there's not enough distinction, and this goes back to brand identity and mission and everything, and skill and labor and all of that artistic thing that goes behind it. I don't want to get so much trouble saying this.
Say it. We need the hook on
No, okay,
podcast.
but I believe that the reason why fashion labels here don't succeed.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so few labels here that have the longevity of my parents' brands, or there's some others, but in terms of there's a handful, right? And why do these new ones not succeed? Because they don't have an identity. They're doing a fashion label as a business and not as a passion. There's two different kinds of businesses. You can either have a business where you want it to operate without you and it becomes a machine and you can sit in the corner and you can, let the things go. Or there's the other kind of business where my parents operate, where it's this is your life and soul, and you put everything into it, and you're there every step of the way, and you know everything from the bottom of how and what technique that people have to sew, all the way until the top and how to create, and everything in between, because it is everything to you. And you have an identity, and that identity is you. I see all of the popping up of all of these different labels now here, even stores labels, whether they're produced here or not, or they exist here. I don't see a stark difference between them.
It's all samey, yeah?
They're all samey because they're appealing to your mass general public. Neither of my parents' brands are. They have extremely, they know their customer, and it's not everybody. But the people that are opening companies now and brands now, they're trying to get as many, a broad demographic accessibility to ensure their success, because, to be honest, I don't think they're confident enough in their styles or their brand identity. So they need to cast a wide net.
What would your advice be then? Somebody trying to get into fashion. Yeah.
Understand exactly who you are, what makes you special, what your strengths are, and focus on that, not everything else, and know your customer.
So I think people, they go into fashion or any business, and they're kind of okay, this is what I want to do, this is the kind of direction, this is what inspires me, but then they second guess things, and they step back, and they're oof, maybe I should just kind of look at other options so that it's not too risky. And then they kind of saturated the idea. Not saturated. The idea is diluted.
That's the thing. That's the more you're trying to play the game, right? The more you have to be risk adverse, because logic dictates that you should do X, Y, and Z. But you need to be ahead of the game. You need to be a pioneer, not a follower. I think that's exactly it. Both my parents, in their own rights with their brands, they're very willing to take risks because they do things outside of the box, and it's not because other people do it that way. So it's about that trusting your internal strength and instinct. It's very intuitive. I think that a lot of people also that start businesses, I mean, fashion labels here, maybe they think it could be a fun business, but is that really their intuitive strength to start a label? Maybe they should just run another kind of business. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Because fashion's not easy.
And it's not for everybody. It is an extremely challenging business, as you know, like as an industry. The complexity, especially when you're doing like these two businesses we're talking about, especially when you're doing from design, sampling, production, retail, all in a vertical operation, the complexity of how to ensure smooth sailing among all of that requires so much personal intuition and interest.
And experience.
And experience.
Yeah. Okay, so what does your typical day look like as CEO? What are you doing? All your coffee dates, luncheons, cocktail parties? That's pretty much it, yeah.
You would like to think so. No, so I mean, being at really don't like the term CEO.
What would you call yourself then?
King of the castle. No, I'm joking. No. Listen, everything is a collaborative experience, okay? And no matter at what position you're in. So at Biasa, even though I had that title, I think you have to be kind of like a jack of all trades in a way. And me coming kind of like, I don't have the experience that my parents have. I don't have a 20-year tenure in the fashion industry. I came into it, yes, learning a lot by default, being my parents' child, but I had to learn a lot on the job, let's just say.
I suppose everybody
does. Yeah. But I mean, to be a CEO, I believe that a CEO in a Bali-based company is a very different role than a CEO in a Western-based company.
In what way?
In the way that Bali works.
What way does it work?
Okay, that's a whole other podcast. That's a whole other can of worms. Okay, but let me get back to what you were asking, okay? So, as CEO of Biasa, it's only, my role had a lot to do with putting out fires, helping navigate people's everyday tasks, because my role as CEO it's just a title, it's a name. But what was I really doing? I was handling so many different departments in terms of making them operate to the best of my ability without proper managers there. Because so much on the strategy side, the thinking side, the critical thinking side, having to help direct and teach and make sure that people are kind of going in the right direction. This goes back into work culture and brand DNA and all of that, just to help make sure that we're guiding them the right way. And that's a lot of my roles, and setting meetings and giving intentions and analyzing work and data and putting out a lot of fires and saying, oh, we have this problem. Okay, this one can't do that. That one can't do that. It's like you're the puppet master without actually being able to lift people's hands. Whereas my mom's role as president, founder, creative director, and head designer, that role as a leader in that department is so different than as a leader on a business operations everyday level versus the creative. So
how do they work together, those two roles?
Well, what really worked with my mom and I is that like her strengths are not mine. Like what she's great at and good at and like basically a genius in are my weaknesses. Like I wouldn't even touch that. But what I'm good at, they're not her strengths. So we could really play to each other's strengths and weaknesses and understand that I'm not going to, even as a CEO, I'm not going to go into her world and tell her how to do things because she knows better. And then in my world, she also kind of fell back on my expertise, my knowledge, and my direction of things because she knows she doesn't know better. Not that she doesn't know, but I know, let's say I'm more in tune with how to work that than she is, and she's more in tune with how to work that than I am. So we really just play to our own strengths.
I presume she's a little bit more resistant as far as getting involved operationally. She's a creative person.
She's an extremely creative person.
So management and operations is probably something that she has a resistance to.
It's not that she's done it, and she's now doing it again. She has to do it because she is a business owner. But the more that she has to be involved in that and that has to go through her door, the less she's able to do the things that she's actually good at, which is the creative side, curation, PR, art direction, photo shoots, the designing, the everything creative about the brand, the more she has to be responsible for everything else, she can't do that, but nobody can replace her there. That is the one place that nobody can replace her. This, other people can step in, support, and do what we need to do to fill in the gaps. This we can't.
Yeah. And I suppose from my experience looking at from an outside perspective, I think the most successful brands, especially smaller brands, not like big retail side, but like small, either family brands or startups, under 50 people or so, there is generally two. There's the creative person, and then there's either somebody who's really good at like e-commerce, or somebody who's really good at wholesale or B2B,
business or sales, yeah.
or business in general, or scaling a business,
Yeah.
or understanding ads really well, somewhere where they can access a market or a niche very well, so that the creative side can penetrate. I find if that side is missing, that person, the creative person, even though the product can be excellent, kind of flounders in limbo, not having a direction of how to really penetrate a niche and get sales traction and brand traction.
See, well, it also depends, because if you're like my mom, and her strengths also lie in understanding unique value propositions, right? So she has this vision. She knows what will and will not work, just because she's so sure of what, and understands her demographics, understands her product, her brand, everything around it is so clear for her that the how and the why, the why and the what are exceptionally clear. Sometimes the how is a little bit difficult. So in a lot of businesses, I mean, it's like, time and time again, the creative and the operational, or the creative and business, creative and finance, they always go head to head and have conflict, because what drives the creative and what drives operational oftentimes go against their base fundamental principles of each other. So I think that's a big challenge for a lot of industries, where you are creatively led, but you have to also be managed and brought
Traditionally,
together.
the creative and the CFO
always
fighting.
Always fighting. But the thing is, we can, like, that fighting should not be detrimental or hindering, because it can actually be very fruitful. Insofar as we understand creative dictates the what and the why, which are very important. And if it's a creative industry, and then the operational, the CFO, whatever, just has to dictate the how, and they have to meet in the middle. They might not always agree, but this has to, like, the creative vision has to be protected and nurtured.
Well, that's what your product is the creative vision. So that's the business at the end of the day.
But the product is the end result of creative fruit, right? The product is, the way I see it, it's that, you have a business that is driven by creativity, but the creativity is the creation part. The product is the result. So at the end of the day, it's the fruit of your labor, but the creativity means that the creative mind needs to have its ability to be in its creative chaos, its creative genius, that cannot be controlled too much. It cannot be regimented. It cannot be made more industrial or efficient. It has to allow for creative freedom and chaos. And then that creative chaos, once it has been conceptualized or conceived, then can be filtered through the more logical operational practice. But if that creative chaos is thwarted and not allowed to be rampant and run free, like not throughout the whole company, but in its own bubble, then you don't have the strength of your creative business.
I get that, yeah, sure. So taking that into account, where do you see Bali going, bringing in fashion, the whole sustainability thing, Bali, where it's going, the direction, where do you see your businesses moving to in the future? What does the next 3 to 5 years look like for both Bali and your fashion brands?
Look, I think Bali, because of the diluting of the market and therefore the resources. But I do not see, this is bad since we have 2 manufacturing companies here, but I do not see that Bali is the best place to grow a manufacturing company for the future, because the skill of that skill that we've said was a dying skill, that was never truly found in Bali. Actually, it was a lot. Like, it was, but it was primarily a lot more of the other Indonesian islands that were residing here or expats here. Like like they have the skill, and now post-COVID, a lot of them have moved back and are not interested in being in Bali, especially with the way that Bali is now. The growth
Too
of
expensive
Bali,
or
Bali identity has changed. Why people used to come to Bali before and what made Bali what it was known for and what made it attractive is no longer what makes it attractive today. So
define. Our interest is in know what you think. What was then and what is now.
So why? I mean, it's quite normal in a way, but what was Bali before? What attracted, if you're talking back in my parents' generation, what attracted people to Bali was completely breaking out of the confines of cultural expectation within their systems, whether it's America, US. You got to start fresh in Bali and you made your own way.
Pioneering people.
Pioneering and not being told how and what and why to do it, but deciding for yourself. So it very much attracted people trying to break free and run away from the man. Right?
Or run away from the law and the tax. I mean, there's a lot of those people in Bali.
There's a lot of those people too, yeah. So people trying to build their own rules, their own systems, and their own reasons why. And then, then Bali on a tour, because this was a kind of like pre-tourism, really, pre what Bali tourism is now. That was people emigrating and like discovering and moving. And then tourism kind of started because it started being known for this, the island of the gods, this luxurious, tropical, exotic getaway where you could just be.
Well, I think Bali's growth was synonymous with Instagram's growth.
Please don't. No. What you see Bali's growth as today, yes. And that's why I'm saying
that's what I'm saying today.
Oh, gosh, yes.
No, I mean, 1994, there weren't,
No.
there was no Instagram. But
There
I'm
was no
talking
Instagram,
this recent wave, the last 10 years, 15 years. It's the rise of
It was the rise of the digital nomads.
Yeah, and digital
And Instagram,
nomads.
yeah. And it's the rise of I'm a bit hesitant to say the millennial generation because I am technically a millennial, but that and the next generations, their growth and their evolution through the entire age of media and what then drove them to places now drives the entire economic growth of that place. Because
It's no longer a pioneer place.
No, it's the follower, it's the mass, it's the expansion, it's the I want
commercialization.
The commercialization. But
that doesn't mean that a business like yours in such a specific niche still can't service those outliers, which it does so well. Those unique individuals that are looking for something a bit different.
Sure, but think about it on a price point level. I mean, if somebody is going to be coming to Bali, like people used to come to Bali, go to the 5-star hotels, the epitome of leisure luxury, right? I mean, you're talking high-spending customers. Both of the brands that we're talking about today, they require a certain price point, somebody willing to spend a certain ticket price, not just because of value, but I'm talking monetarily. The people that are spending that much money and that are coming here on a leisurely way are going to spend 2 hours in traffic to go anywhere with the kind of chaos of this younger demographic on this party scene and the craziness of the streets and energy in Bali. They're not coming for those reasons anymore. It no longer entices that kind of person. And the kind of person that's coming to Bali now, whether they're coming here for 6 months, a work experience, digital nomad, influencer, whatever the case may be, they... not to say that they don't have money or they're not willing to spend money, but that generation of people spend money on entirely different interests.
Experiences and travel.
Travel.
But fashion's still a part of that.
No, they're going to buy fashion that is trend. It's all about trend. It's all about...
But Biasa and Paul Ropp is trend, but it's a unique outlier.
It's not trend. It's never followed any trend.
It's their own. It's your own trend, is what I'm saying. I mean, it has its you
style.
It's style. Yeah.
It's style. It's about the freedom of expression. But who's expressing
but that
anything?
That is a trend in itself.
Freedom of expression, identity. Only now with Gen Z, I feel like people are getting a little bit more experimental with their expression of identity and style. even though I don't necessarily like it, but I think it's quite interesting. It doesn't matter. They're being more experimental now. There's been several years of this growth of the millennial population and generation where style, class, aesthetic, it's become homogenized into some pool of sameness and replicas of each other because it's all about commercial growth and being a part of that. That's like literally the sickness, the disease of Instagram.
You look at it like that, yeah. Or the
Yes, I am a
opportunity-
little bit pessimistic.
The opportunity of Instagram,
Instagram can be an opportunity.
Sure, and there's two ways to take it, and there is the good side and the bad side. But I think that's a podcast in and of itself.
Yes.
Yeah, and how social media affects culture and society. I think let's finish it off because I think there's a lot of young, aspiring people either in the fashion industry starting a label, wanting to start a label, who work in it. What are some advice and wisdom? What more would you say to somebody trying to crack into this industry?
Okay, number one, figure out your why. Why do you want to crack into this industry?
Okay.
And then if you figure out your why and you're sure with your why, figure out and be sure with your identity because that's very connected to your why, your identity. And then know your person, know your demographic. I don't know much else to say aside from those things because
So
I think
you know your customer.
know your customer, and your customer does not have to be good at what you do. Be good at something. If you're good at something, be good at that and capitalize on that.
Got it. Okay. Well, any more wise words of wisdom, or should we close it off?
I think we're good.
That's it.
I don't want to rant on to the negatives anymore.
Time for a cocktail, yeah?
Absolutely.
So thank you very much. Thank you for Sayang for joining us. It was informative and lots of tips and tricks and things to do and not to do. Don't forget the two brands that Sayang is either a CEO of or was, Paul Ropp and Biasa. We'll put the links down here below. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
It was very inspiring and insightful. So thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.